Hello, and welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited you could join me today. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Now, on the Silicon Alley Podcast, I talk to entrepreneurs and top performers to understand what it takes to truly grow and scale a business. You'll get actionable advice that you can apply in your own business and life. Now, on today's episode, I sit down with Stephen Collins, a senior software engineer and the founder of Double Precision Software. Before I jump into what you can expect on today's episode, if you have not already, please make sure to subscribe and follow the Silicon Alley Podcast wherever you get your podcasts so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. And of course, if you hear something that you like, please be sure to share the podcast with others on social media, text, email, or however you prefer. It's the only way the community grows. So today's guest, Stephen Collins, is a lifelong geek who's passionate about quality software. He began programming in GW Basic at the age of 8 and spent the rest of his life honing his skills. After his time in the U.S. Air Force, he began his civilian career developing .NET applications for a series of Fortune 500 companies and multiple startups. In his free time, Stephen enjoys spending time with his wife and 5 children, and when there's time, a little bit of gaming. On today's episode, we discuss the human side of software and how good software feels like magic. Stephen shares ways that non-technical people can learn the language of software and begin building that app that you've been dreaming about without spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Lastly, Stephen explains how and why he maintains 2 budgets simultaneously and budgets down to the penny. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's maker-focused episode of the Silicon Alley Podcast featuring the Stephen Collins.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying I'll never leave this.
Stephen, welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And so if anyone listened to episode 54 of the podcast, you heard me reference someone that we brought onto the Ostrich team, and that's Stephen. So really excited to sit down and kind of talk about your experience as an engineer and some of the things that you've done on the entrepreneurial side as well. Mm-hmm. So Stephen, to kick it off, I'd love to get just a little bit of background on who you are for the audience. So if you could do just a quick little like elevator pitch and sort of, who you are, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I am just a lifelong geek is really the easiest way to describe me. I got my first computer when I was about 8 years old, a Tandy 1000 RL for anybody who's, my age or older. And it had a copy of a BASIC compiler on it. And I played around with it a little bit and it blew my mind right away that as opposed to just clicking around and doing what the computer has available, I can make whatever I want. It's crazy, but I knew at that age that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And so that was my focus, among the other things that I would do as a young boy, just forever. And it's still going on today.
That's awesome. Do you remember what that first thing or one of the first couple things that you created as a kid?
Well, of course, anybody who gets BASIC as their first programming language, it's, print, Stephen is the greatest, go to 10, but this speaks to how much of a nerd I am. The first thing I made that was of any significance at all was actually a POS system.
Okay.
One of my first jobs was at a sub shop, and the POS system they had was just not sufficient to me. So I just started building my own, and it never went anywhere, but boy, did I learn a lot in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did you start? Like, was it digging into like forums or finding other people that were also really into building software? Like, how did you start and take that sort of initial interest and run with it?
Well, I was just really lucky early on. When I had first started in BASIC, I actually just went to the public library and just by chance, they had a book on that language. And that's the way it continued for years. It was primarily just physical books.
Okay.
I later got into VB6 and VB.NET and some database things, and all of that was guided by physical books. It wasn't until probably after high school that I discovered things like Stack Overflow, which of
Yeah.
course didn't even exist until like, I believe 2003.
Yeah.
That I really started to do a lot of my more research online. And
Okay.
honestly, it wasn't until the past maybe 15, 20 years ago that good documentation online even really existed.
Okay. Yeah. So you were the old school way. Yeah. Going to the library and looking these things up and then applying it and getting on your computer and going from there.
Yeah, we've definitely come a long way. I mean, like the concept of exceptions was definitely just a nice boon for me, because I come from the days when it was, error 1 2 3 4, look it up and blow me. So
Yeah, good luck. Go figure it out. Yeah.
yeah.
Things have come a long way. So what are some of the things that you've seen change over the years, being an engineer, being a developer, in terms of the industry? One, you mentioned documentation. What are some of the things that you've seen change?
Well, a lot of it comes back to what you just said, is the community. We've developed almost in some ways a celebrity culture around really skilled developers, which I see as a good thing. I mean, there's guys like Scott Hanselman. Everybody remembers Joel Spolsky, Uncle Bob, all these guys who, in a lot of cases, are just really great people to begin with. And so it's really easy to listen to their advice on what it means to be a great developer.
Gotcha. Yeah. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from those guys? What are some of the things that they talk about for folks that maybe aren't as familiar with who they are in terms of the developer sense and their sort of ethos?
The biggest thing for me is the ones that really get into the human side of development.
Okay.
It's really easy to get mired in the details of, how do I implement these features and things like that, which is of course important. But one thing I've really learned over my career is that the human side of what Scott Hanselman would call the squishy stuff is just as important as the technical details. If you don't understand if you can't empathize with your users, then you're just not going to create good quality software.
Yeah.
Maybe as technically great as you want it to be, but if it's not what your users want, then what's the point,
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I guess if you think about some of the most elegant software, it could be super complex in the back end, but the user has no idea how the complexity, right? It's that, as you said, the human side. What are you like when you think about approaching that human side of development, that human side of software? How do you do that? Like, what are some of the things that you start to think about as a developer, and how do you get away from just the technical requirements as you mentioned?
One of my favorite things to do when it's possible is, and I encourage any developer who has the opportunity to do this, is actually sit down with a user, whether that be, say you're writing some internal administrative tool for some guy at the CEO's office to click some boxes. Even with something like that doesn't feel important, sit down with whoever that user is and speak to them on their own terms. Don't come in there with, do you want buttons that do this or a database that stores this? But rather just have a conversation about what their goals are with that software and code to that.
Okay. And why is that so important? And is that something that do you think is often missed when folks are developing new tools?
Oh, it's absolutely important. And it is, at least in my experience, is missed a lot for lots of different reasons. I already mentioned we tend to get mired in technical details,
Sure.
but it comes from lots of different directions. Sometimes it's a restriction that's placed on us.
Yeah.
They want to see, a delivery. They want to see something substantial whatever their intervals want to be, as opposed to, if you do get the opportunity to sit down with them and say, hey, what are your goals? in a lot of cases, you'll even end up getting more leeway because they understand, oh, they're making this for me. It's not just
Yeah.
a tool that I'm going to have to interact with.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's a really important point to put on that. And when you think about in your own career, do you have any examples of maybe times where that hasn't been the case or hasn't gone well? And then times when it has, the difference in terms of the product, the ultimate software that you end up building in that process, when you do have the opportunity to sit down with a user and really understand their needs versus, hey, here's some technical requirements and here's the deadline.
So I worked at a place a long time ago who had a CEO who was all about delivery. And his goal was he wanted to satisfy his customers as quickly as possible, which, you know, is completely understandable. But when it ended up happening is that he would come up, or he would find suggestions from these users and then immediately promise them a deadline. He would say, we're going to have this done in 2 weeks. And then come to me and the CTO and say, hey, this needs to be done in 2 weeks. And of course, we've got to come back and say, well, that's a month-long project, if not more. What are we going to do now? But then again, there's also been situations like my very first job as a young intern programmer was at a plant that made airfoils for jet engines.
Okay.
Like the turbine blades and the compressor blades. And my favorite thing about that job was I was able to, at any time, just get up and walk into the plant and just sit down with anybody there. And I was able to create some great products out of that, completely beyond what the original requirements were. Thankfully, I had that kind of freedom because I was able to sit with them and say, hey, what are some problems you have with this existing software? Because my job at the time was to basically rewrite everything. I started at step number 1 in the process, rewrote that application and moved on. And, you know, there's definitely some horror stories in that as well. But the opportunity to actually go out and, one, learn about the business itself and the process of creating these things, which didn't always lead to better software, but it helped me just, I'm the type of person who just likes to learn everything. So if at the very least, it helped me just grow as the intellectual side of my personality.
Yeah. I think that's a great example, Stephen, and definitely something that you hear a lot, especially in the corporate world where there's a lot of, there's silos, right? Everything's kind of siloed off. Mm-hmm. And so being able to bridge those communications, it sounds like was really, really impactful. What are some ways that you can open up better lines of communication, or some of the things from maybe that job specifically of how you can best bridge those silos and really allow the development team to work with, whether it's internal users building internal tools or external, and really, like I said, kind of create that community where there is a collaboration and things aren't as siloed? What are some of the suggestions that you've seen in your own career?
Honestly, I wish I had a good answer to that.
And that might be very telling of most organizations, to be honest.
And, you know, despite having the title of senior developer for the past umpteen years of my career, it's often been in title only.
Okay.
You know, it's all that means is I get paid a little bit more than the other guy. And it's worth pointing out that it's not always silos across the company either. Sometimes it's silos within the IT department. Often, especially when we've got, you know, crunch time deadlines, there's rarely, in my experience, time for instance, mentorship, where we've got greener developers who are, you know, producing results, but the actual code to get there is nowhere near as efficient or as elegant as it could be. I've been fortunate to have a couple of scenarios where I was able to mentor younger developers and just from a technical perspective, try to hone their skills.
Yeah. So within the IT department, I want to click into that specifically, like within the, the development team, or whether it's QA, what are some of the silos that crop up, and like some of the challenges that whether you're building a company, you're at a company that you want to avoid?
It usually focuses around those designations, like you pointed out. There's QA,
Okay.
there's the actual developers, there's the management. In some positions I've had in the past, they set up those silos seemingly intentionally, because they have very specific roles. But I remember one position specifically, I had the opportunity to do full-on presentations about, we need to set up communication lines between all of these different departments, because we're going to end up with a better quality product in the end. And really the only way I've found to break those down is to force my way in. I mean, nowadays, even if we're 2 cubicles away from each other, it's typically IM that we're using to communicate with.
Yeah.
And in most enterprise setups, there's nothing stopping me from messaging a manager directly or someone in the QA team directly, and just build that rapport without any permission whatsoever. And in a lot of cases, at the very least, you'll have inroads to those departments where they wouldn't be offered to begin with.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that that's really important. It's something that was actually super critical when, the time that I spent in the corporate world, the folks that were able to bridge outside of their own department. I was specifically in sales. So the people that were able to work across the org, whether it was in operations or marketing or whatever it was, tended to be the most successful because they, one, understood the business the best, right? And two, they had those lines of communication. So when there was something that wasn't working or they had a question, they knew who to go to. When you think about some of the misconceptions that developers have about the dev shop, we kind of alluded to some of them in terms of, hey, let's just go get this done. Here's the requirements, and then, kick it off. What are some of those misconceptions that you've seen from your end on the development side?
The biggest one is definitely the time requirements for any given project. I don't know how many times I've had friends or colleagues come to me and say, hey, you can write software, let's build this thing. And when I sit down and try to determine what sort of timeline we're looking at, and I come back and say, this project is 6 months and I cost this much, they immediately bail, because they're thinking, oh, this is the kind of thing that you throw together in a weekend, which for the non-technical people out there seems reasonable, because you see, say, apps showing up every single day. It seems like people just throw these things together. But once you do get into the weeds of, well, in order to have this feature in your app, we need to have these 7 bits of infrastructure set up.
Yeah.
It becomes really expensive really quick. And the other thing is, even when you do dive into a project, one of those things I try to include in my estimates is insurance and quality. Things like having unit tests behind the code, or thorough documentation on how it was written or how to use things. Those do take a lot of additional time, but the long-term advantage of those is something you can't really quantify.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Stephen. And for those that aren't at all familiar with software, what do you mean by documentation?
So documentation in my world exists really in two places. We've got our technical documentation, which is the information that we need as developers to keep up with how things are built and how things work. But the other side of it that's often not even referred to as documentation is things like the instructions for a user of your application for how to use it. Think like,
Okay.
one of my favorite examples is Snapchat. Call me old, but I cannot work that application. It just blows my mind. And
Yeah.
somehow they are so good at UI with certain audiences that they just pick it up immediately. But what I need for somebody who's not familiar with it is at the very least, bits and pieces on the interface to say, hey, this is how you take a picture. This is how you change the filters.
Yeah.
There's definitely, like I said, things to be said about UI that teaches you how to use it in and itself. But there's, other services like, take Facebook.
Yeah.
Facebook has a lot of features, especially around things like privacy settings. And for a long time, they weren't, intentionally or not, weren't very good at conveying to the user, hey, this is how you manage your privacy within our service.
Mm-hmm.
And having that documentation on how you access things that are important to you as a user is super important.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because you naturally just assume, well, someone will be able to figure it out, right? Like you don't think about documenting from that regard, from the user side, and then obviously, from the development side. What are some of the challenges that happen when you have poor documentation, or and I'm thinking more so from the development side versus the user. I think that's pretty straightforward. Same way with Snapchat, by the way. There's always like another feature that you didn't know worked, and like, how are people doing this? But yeah, on the development side, what are some of the things that happen when you don't get that piece right?
It's almost always, like you said, there's definitely going to be a point where we can figure it out. But one thing that again, people tend to not realize is the time investment. Even for a single developer working on one project, it often gets to a point in scope where I've forgotten entirely how this part of my application has worked. And if I don't document, oh, this thing interacts with this system, which then interacts with this system, it's going to take me an extra hour, sometimes a day, to refresh my memory on how these interactions all work and how I can not introduce bugs by doing that incorrectly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And that's something that, I've learned using the AppGyver, which is the front end no code builder. And you can do some logic stuff with that, where I'll, do one thing and forget that it's connected to 12 other things, and it messes up the entire application. You're like, why isn't this working? You're like, oh, I forgot. And it takes a lot of time. So I think that for folks that have never built software, there's so many little things. I think that, what is the saying, that like you spend the majority of your time just debugging your application typically, like it's not really writing the code.
Right. One of my favorite things about programming is, why does this work?
Yeah, figuring out why. Yeah, exactly. How come it worked the first time? What did I do right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Stephen, you mentioned it earlier, but Double Precision Software, what led you to start the consulting business, and what's the aim of that practice, and what has that allowed you to do, and how do you manage building that service, that business that you've created with Double Precision?
A lot of it, honestly, is about honing my skills. It's great to be able to reach into any aspect, or rather, any industry that I can reach out to and learn more about how businesses are run, how software can help that be more efficient. And a lot of it is also because I'm in charge of my code, I can be in charge of that quality. Definitely, I'm sure any experienced developer can tell you one of the best feelings you can get in this industry is realizing that a month has gone by and your customer hasn't complained about anything. And when I'm able to make my own hours and, focus on what I think is important in how I'm writing this software,
Mm-hmm.
then when that month goes by, I'm even more proud of what I've created, because not only is it, they haven't had any bugs. Why is that? It's, there haven't been any bugs, but I know that because I've, for instance, instrumented my code in a way that I can keep tabs on it. And I've maybe been able to catch bugs before they've even noticed it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you're almost able to get ahead of the user bugs, right? When you do it well.
Right.
That's awesome. And when you're thinking about taking on a project or evaluating a project, what does that look like, and how do you typically make that decision of, hey, this is something interesting that I want to work on?
Right. My evaluation process is usually pretty simple. It has to be something that I can get excited about. One of the nice things about, having my own business and being able to choose contracts as I see fit is that I don't have to take on things that I feel like are going to be a slog.
Yeah.
But of course, that doesn't mean that I also don't see it as, this is whether or not I'm going to have fun with it, this is something that's really going to provide value to someone.
Okay.
And that's really the two main criteria for me is, if from a technical perspective, it's something that I can really enjoy working on, maybe I can explore a new technology that I've been keeping my eye on but haven't been able to use, or the project itself seems like it's something that's really going to improve people's lives.
No, I love that. Those two kind of criteria, and it goes back to your lifelong learning and that just inquisitive nature that you have of finding new technologies. Besides Ostrich, what are some of your favorite projects that you've worked on?
There's a couple in particular that come to mind. One of them is how you came to me is through GoMigo. I'm working on an app right now, which should be released fairly soon. That's about getting people together without much effort. One of the big problems, especially right now around COVID, is lots of people are lonely, and a lot of people are unwilling to admit it, or embarrassed to admit it. And so what we do at GoMigo is, you tell us what kind of free time do you have, and what are you interested in, and what is your circle of friends, whether or not you spend a lot of time with them. We do the work for you to find out, hey, you are both interested in playing board games and you're both open at 6 p.m. on Saturday. Let's get you guys together, and we'll set it up for you to get you guys some time together and build those relationships.
Gotcha. Yeah, it almost takes the kind of like social pressure of, oh, well, who's going to reach out, or maybe they're free. Do I want to admit that I'm not free on Saturday night? It's whatever. Or, yeah. Or
Of course.
you've got all the other obligations, family and all those other things. And I love that. So what's been the reaction so far? I know it's like been in a kind of a testing, right? A friends and family type testing. What's been the reaction so far with GoMigo?
Oh, it's been wholly positive, which is exciting to me, of course, because this is something where, and this is often something that happens when you're on the development side of a project, is you spend all this time in the technical details of things, but when then you end up getting feedback from a real person saying, I'm excited to use this and this will, genuinely help me. That is one of the ways you can keep in tune with that human side of software, where you remember ultimately, hey, this is about someone who's going to use this and it's going to improve their life in some way.
Yeah. No, I love that. And you keep bringing it back to the human side of software. And I think that's so great. Gomigo is obviously getting people together, and in a COVID world, it's remote, but in a non-COVID world, I'd assume that would also be kind of in person. How do you see software fitting into blending kind of our physical world and our digital world? And how can we allow those to kind of work better together and enable software to kind of help us in the physical realm as well?
Well, it's interesting you use the word blending, because I think really the key to it is making it as invisible as possible. Of
Interesting.
course, with a lot of software, well, almost all software, you do have to interact with it directly at some point. But
Sure.
the more that it does without your effort in a way that doesn't seem creepy,
Yeah.
like ads that are based on what you've just been talking about. That's really what I'm trying to push towards in any project like this. Of course, one of my favorite quotes is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. It should
Yep.
seem like it's magic and just works for you the way you expect it to work.
Yeah, I love that. I think that quote really hits it. Making things feel like magic when all of a sudden things are done and not, as you said, in a not creepy way where, your Alexa or Google Home heard you and now all of a sudden you're getting fed an ad on your news feed. Stephen, in terms of making that a reality, what do you see as ways for us to make kind of our lives better? And it sounds like Gomigo is one of those ways, but are there some different ways or hypotheses, things that you're excited about in terms of software, things coming out of the pike or things that you might be working on in the future?
Well, most of the things I'm excited about right now, because I'm such a nerd, are really on more the technical side.
Okay.
But really, to turn that more on its head, I think getting a message out there that you don't need software for everything is also important. In a way, Gomigo is kind of pushing that idea, because yes, it's a technology to help you do something, but ultimately the goal is to step away from it and have
Yeah.
human to human interaction. There's so many things out there where, and of course, it's been a topic of conversation for years. We're spending so much more time in these devices. Well, what if the software that we interact with every day is all encouraging us to have more human interaction, have more real experiences? I don't know what that will look like. It's definitely something I've been thinking about and something I want to work towards. But it's definitely somewhere, a place that I want technology to go.
I like that a lot, Stephen. And that, I mean, if anyone's seen the Netflix documentary, What the Social Dilemma, that I think was released recently, I mean, that kind of really highlights some of the problems, especially with the social networks specifically.
Yeah, it's a new crazy world we live in, but I feel like one of the privileged few who can help steer things in the right direction. Even being
Yeah.
someone who's deep in the weeds, I feel like I want to have the influence outside of that to be able to make that change.
How do you do that, right? Obviously, you've got kind of the inside scoop, building software, understanding how it works and some of these things. How do you communicate that and bridge that gap and help get us to that better sort of version where we're not just consumed by software, but using it to enrich our lives?
Right. That's another thing I wish I had a good answer for.
I'm putting all the philosophical questions on you.
Of course. I mean, maybe our listeners can reach in and say, hey, I've got an idea for this. That's definitely something I'd be interested in hearing about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that we've talked about kind of offline as well, that I think is really important to hit on, is that a lot of the listeners to the podcast aren't super technical. And, it seems like everyone has an app idea or some sort of like technology idea these days, but they just don't know how to build it or all that kind of stuff. What are your recommendations for someone that isn't technical, but is interested in building something technical? How do you start to learn kind of the language and be able to communicate with engineers and folks like yourself.
Right. That's definitely something I've struggled with a lot over my whole career. Is I've had countless people come to me and say, "Hey, this seems like a really cool thing to be able to do. How do I get started?" And one thing I have realized is I am a terrible teacher. I am much better
Okay.
when it comes to teaching this world. I'm much better at teaching, again, the human side of it and maybe giving more broad strokes advice. One of my favorite things is, one, reach out to the community at large. This one thing we discussed earlier is the community of technical people and the whole maker movement and all of that is growing like crazy. And one thing to realize right away is there are so many people who are also wanting to learn exactly that. And there are communities that will encourage that sort of thing. The other big thing is, when it comes to the pure technical side of it, get started with, like you did, something that lowers that barrier to entry, something like a no-code approach to creating application. I mean, we're a testament to the vast majority of what has occurred with Ostrich is basically no code. And we've got a almost complete functional project from that. And if it's designed well, the software that lets you create those things also sort of subtly pushes you in the direction of those general concepts you need to grasp when it comes down to actual programming.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. I know that my own experience using AppGyver, which is that no code tool that we've been using, teaches you just some of the lingo around like basic programming stuff, strings and like just all these different things, understanding how to do API calls, the difference between, posts and GET requests, all these different things. They're small things, but you start to kind of like figure things out. And I have realized how much more complex from the outside looking in, or from now being on the inside, how much more complex it is. Because what you're really doing when you're building software isn't just, coding and putting features out. It's really the infrastructure and how things communicate and the brains behind it that is like at least for me, the difficult thing to grasp, because designing buttons and things like that, we've all interacted with it. So that's relatively straightforward. But as you said, those no code tools allow you to kind of start to learn some of the lingo.
Right. And that comes back to a previous point about the time investment required. It's not until you get into the weeds of it, even using these no code and low code tools, where you start to realize, in order to build something that really works and is robust, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm so much when I see little features that get added to apps or websites that I use, and it's like something that seems simple that I would have never noticed before. I'm like, wow, how'd they do that? Like, that's awesome.
Right. One of my favorite examples of that is, I'm sure a lot of developers are familiar with the React framework. Yeah. Where that came from was one feature in Facebook. When you click on, before you click on the like button, and that's all there was. Yeah. But what they wanted was that little pop-up with the different reactions you can have. The beginning of React was that feature and nothing more. And wow. That's actually one of the exciting things in programming is, once you really grasp something and can build something that really works, even if it's really small, those with that type of mind are going to want to continue that. What is that eponymous law about? Projects will expand to fill the space that is allowed. Yeah. Well, you're just learning programming. Your time is virtually infinite, right? And so if you can build something, even the smallest little thing, a counter on a web page, but you've done it yourself, it's it's like a virus. It'll take you over, and it's exactly what happened to me. The littlest thing, I just kept building and building and building, and it's grown into an entire career that I love.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. I love that, Stephen. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was that there's places to connect when we were talking about bridging the gap between non-developers and developers, technical people, non-technical people, and learning that language. You mentioned that there's communities, the maker community. Where do you find those folks? Like where do you hang out? Like if I wanna go and connect with more folks like you, Stephen, like where do I need to go? Is it like, obviously not COVID, so I can't go out and go somewhere physical, but like where?
Right. Well, one place in particular, which may seem counterintuitive, is a subreddit called Programming, and another one called Programming Buddies. I've actually met a couple of really great friends on our Programming Buddies. One that I just met about a week ago, incredibly skilled guy, but his only experience is in the UI side.
Okay.
And fortunately, my weakest area is the UI. So we've just been, back and forth for a week or so now, and have immediately built up a great rapport. And that's really, just like building something small in development. That's all it takes is that first little seed, and you're off to the races. A lot of people also would suggest Stack Overflow. There are Stack Exchange, that whole system. There are communities there who are all about brand new programmers being able to come in and ask technical questions.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks for sharing those, because I think that's something where it's like, from the inside, it's obvious where you go, but from the outside looking in, I don't know where's the best place. And even if I'm talking to someone, do I know if I'm talking to someone that actually knows what they're talking about, or do they just know a little bit more than I do? And, but I guess that's still an improvement. So Stephen, in terms of Double Precision and just in general, when you think about success, how do you define success for yourself?
The simplest answer is, if what I've created is exactly what someone wants. Well, I suppose exactly is limiting myself a lot. But really it comes down to what effect the thing I created has on the people who will use it.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm not done until they say, hey, this is something that provides value to me now. And more so, if they're coming to me with ideas on how to improve it. That's really a huge indicator of success in software specifically. If the users of your app are so engaged with your product that they want to contribute to improving it, then that is a huge indication of success.
Yeah. No, I love that example, right? If you're so invested in something that you care enough to want to fix it or make suggestions, that's a really good sign that people like what you're building.
Right. And that's something you see a lot more in, like, for instance, the open source community, which has definitely exploded recently with, sites like GitHub, where if there's a product like a library or something of the like that you use and really value, then it becomes worth your time to, for instance, fix a bug that you found in it. And that's how those really popular libraries grow.
Yeah.
Is that, someone finds it so valuable that they want to contribute.
Yeah. The open source community is definitely changing the way software is built and companies are run and all these different things. And I think it makes sense being able to contribute, have anyone kind of contribute and debug, and you get the power of more minds focused on solving certain problems. It makes a lot of sense. And it's definitely changing the whole industry.
Right. It's the original Wikipedia model, right? The wisdom of the masses.
Yeah, exactly. Wisdom of the crowd. Stephen, I want to transition here and get into the personal finance. Obviously, with Ostrich, that's a big focus. And so part of this podcast is kind of having some of the conversations that we don't normally have when it comes to money and personal finance. Could you describe your relationship with money?
Well, the biggest answer to that is I budget to the penny. I didn't grow up super poor, so it's not like I'm, really focused on the value of it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just as a part of my personality, I want to be able to know what's coming up. And that, I will budget to the penny months out as well.
Okay.
Which sounds like a great idea, but definitely has its downsides, because as encouraging as it can be to see, hey, if I save this much for the next 6 months, I'll be able to make this big purchase or have this vacation. But at the same time, if you go too far out and you end up seeing that long down the road number going down because of unexpected expenses and things like that, it can also get really discouraging.
So how do you balance that? And I'm also curious what tools you use, if it's Excel or if there's other things that you use.
Excel is my go-to, actually.
Okay.
I want that flexibility to be able to just calculate things however I need to. And really my approach comes in two different ways. I basically maintain two budgets at once. There's a really long-term budget that I'll only go to if I really need to hit a specific goal long-term. But then on the day-to-day, I keep it to at a minimum or at most 2 paychecks.
Okay.
The strategy there is I want to know next week that I can afford all the bills that are coming up, and make sure that I have a little bit of a cushion at any time for unexpected expenses. And of course, like anybody would say, I need to know right now how much money I have, so that if anything, if I'm anywhere I need to be and need to know, hey, can I afford this? I have that information immediately.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. And I mean, you said you didn't grow up extremely poor or anything like that. Do you know where that sort of mentality came from? Because I know I haven't really spoken to anyone that goes all the way to the penny, and I like the two different budgets that you have set up. But I'm just curious how, like, where that came from, or where, if you can trace it back.
Yeah, it's definitely from my dad.
Okay.
He was he was such a huge influence on my life, and still is. And when I was growing up, part of the reason I didn't grow up poor is he worked constantly. It seemed like, from the perspective of a young child, his goal in life was to make our life as comfortable as possible. And the funny thing is, the specifics of budgeting down to the penny didn't really come from him directly. It was more just that general influence of, one, always do your best at everything, even little things like your personal finance. Which of course you could argue is a big thing. But also, make sure that your family, which I have five kids, make sure that your family is taken care of at every minute.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And have you taken that approach, or have you had conversations with your kids about money or approached that? Is that something that you've actively thought about, like trying to instill in them when they're young, or?
Right. Well, of course I could get into, a whole long conversation about the way I go about things like that with my kids. But I am kind of unique in that, my first two, which are now 11 and 12, they are as inquisitive, if not more, as I am.
Okay.
And we've definitely had our rough patches financially, and so they'll hear me talking about it. And I've actually had long, in-depth conversations with them about just the concept of money and, how important and not important it is. I feel like they're a little young to be able to get into the details of, managing it specifically, but I have specifically tried to make it clear that, it's something that you definitely need to keep a handle on, but it's not everything.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. I mean, obviously, 11 and 12, the oldest, you've got to balance what makes sense at what age. But yeah, it sounds like you've started to have those conversations, and the fact that they're inquisitive sounds like they're probably going to ask you anyway. Stephen, in terms of the best investment that you've made, what would you say that is?
Well, this may seem like a deflecting answer, but honestly, the best time investments I've made have been investments in time. I would probably consider my time in the military as my biggest investment, obviously, primarily in time, but in, me as a person. Anyone who's served any time will tell you, it makes you a better person, period. And the big thing in the military, of course, is discipline. And I wasn't near as disciplined with my finances before I joined the military as after.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I love that. And I found that when I asked this question, most of the responses tend to be not about an asset or an actual, it was more of a time investment or something that decision that you made. So that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything specific, you mentioned the discipline, that really stands out with your time in the military?
I suppose the biggest influence that the military had on me, which I'm sure is the case for a lot of my brothers in uniform, is the camaraderie, the importance of having people you can rely on. Mm-hmm. I mean, many people have said this many times before, but one of the best things about wearing that uniform is knowing that everyone else wearing that uniform has your back no matter what. Yeah. And building that as a civilian is certainly more difficult, but the value is exactly the same.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I want that to sink in for a second. That's good. Yeah. Having that, the, as you said, your brothers in uniform, people that you can really rely on, especially I feel like in this instant generation, and depending on where you are, there's always people that are kind of have an angle sort of thing. So developing deep relationships, for even though we're more connected in certain ways through technology, is almost even more challenging. So I love that. I love that answer. Now, Stephen, on the other side, what would you say is the dumbest money mistake or biggest money mistake that you've made?
Well, the simple answer to that is not putting enough aside, which I'm sure is almost everyone's biggest mistake. I mean, it's also the one piece of advice you always hear is have a nest egg. Yeah. But more broadly than that, my biggest problem financially is that when I do get to a place where I do feel really secure after some sort of financial downfall, I tend to overspend because I get excited about that fact.
Yeah.
And so that ends up putting me in another bad situation.
Yeah, that pendulum swings. You're like, I dug myself out. Now I need to reward myself. And then, oh, well, crap. Now I'm kind of swinging back in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
Stephen, in terms of kind of the biggest challenges that you see facing everyday Americans when it comes to finances, what would you say that is?
I think in a lot of ways, it's mostly fear. And people manifest that fear in a lot of different ways, and sometimes that reaction to it is a good direction to go. For instance, I don't know what's coming up, so I'm going to put away as much as I can.
Mhm.
But then you have the side that says, I don't know what's coming up, so I'm just going to live in the moment and enjoy what I can with the money I can. And I wish I had an answer to where that balance is. But that's got to be, especially in the age we're living now. It's become probably the biggest root cause behind making bad financial decisions, period.
Yeah. Yeah. That fear, I think you're right. It can paralyze some people and cause others to act in certain irrational ways or ways that aren't necessarily in their best interest. So I like that answer a lot. Stephen, I want to thank you for sitting down, and I want to leave you with the last word. So whatever you'd like to share with the audience, and then for folks that want to connect with you off the podcast, I tend to say offline, but I guess it's probably still technically online. How can folks connect with you? And I'll leave you with the last word.
So I'm not really that active on social media. I don't have a Twitter. I plan on setting up one for my business at some point. But really, back to the point of let's have a human connection, email me, sgcollins@outlook.com. If anybody out there is, trying to get into programming, or maybe you're a career developer and you want to look into being a better developer, or maybe focusing on the human side of things, just drop me a line. I may not get to you right away, but I will definitely get to you.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you again so much for sitting down. This was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you sharing your story and getting into some philosophical questions about about technology. And yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you.
On your way out, please be sure to share the podcast with others. That's the only way the community grows and others hear these incredible stories from entrepreneurs, VCs, and top performers. I take pride in telling a mix of stories that have never been heard, in addition to the notable names and stories that you love. So please do your friends and family a favor and share Silicon Alley. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. Have an inspired day.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate.